Good morning, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar topic, Managing the Rising Cost of Long-Term Liabilities During Fiscal Uncertainty. My name is James Collins. I'm the Senior Director of Business Development here at CSBA, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. We will be recording today's webinar, and everyone will receive a link to the recording. If you have a question for our panelists, please submit it using the Q&A button, not the chat function. We will go through all your questions at the end of the webinar. If you have a question after the close of the webinar, you can always email us at csba@csba.org. At this time, I would like to introduce our presenters for today's discussion. Chris Reef, Legislative Director, Governmental Relations, CSBA. Chris will be discussing the May revision to the governor's budget. And then Ryan Nicasio, Senior Vice President of Consulting Division for PARS and manages plan compliance. Once Chris has updated us on the May revision, there will be a transition to Ryan at that time. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit using the Q&A button, not the chat function. With that said, Chris, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So just a reminder in terms of the logistics, if you have questions, please do use the Q&A function, not the chat function. And we'll be doing questions at the end and rolling through those questions that are provided in the Q&A function at the end. So James went through the presenters and who's here today. And I'm here to present on the May revise. Let me just kind of take a moment here to describe what the May revise is for those who are unfamiliar. So May revise is required by statute. It's required of the governor to present an update on updated state general fund revenues and any proposals or changes that he has to his existing state program expenditures. And what the May revise really reflects is a change, and what the change we saw in terms of the revenues from the April 15th income tax filing deadline. And so this really gives the opportunity for the state legislature and the governor to look at the state budget through much more holistic lenses to use actual revenues as opposed to the January budget proposal, which is just a proposal really because it's reflective of projected revenues where the state believes the state will be in terms of overall revenues. Included within that statutory requirement is an update on where Prop 98 sits and what the Prop 98 guarantee is required to be for the current budget year and the coming fiscal year. So let's get right into it and get into the details of where we sit vis-a-vis the governor's May revise. So as many of you are well aware, I'm sure, we are facing a operational and current state budget deficit. Back in January, the estimate by the state's Department of Finance and the governor was to the tune of about 37.9, just under $38 billion in terms of our operational deficit. The May revise updated that deficit to the tune of $7 billion, with an overall deficit of about $45 billion. However, if you go back to April, there was what we described as kind of early actions taken by the legislature to try to address or reduce the operational budget in the current and fiscal year or budget year. And when I say current year, obviously I mean the current school year, 23-24. And then when I say budget year, it's typically how we refer to the coming budget year. So this would be 24-25. So again, that early action in April reduced the size of the operational budget by the tune of about $17.3 billion. This is leaving a remaining estimated deficit of 26. I'll take a little bit of editorial here to just point out that when we were in January, there was a difference of opinion in terms of what the size of the deficit is. So the state's nonpartisan legislative analyst office, which is the kind of nonpartisan policy and fiscal advisor to the state legislature, estimated the budget deficit closer to $78 billion. So that is a stark difference to what the governor and the Department of Finance started out with, to the tune of about $30 billion. So that continues to be something that hangs over these conversations in relation to the budget. In terms of Prop 98, this is a quick update and a slide that we like to provide that provides the overall numbers of what the guarantee is. You'll see that between January and May of this year, the estimated current year ability to meet the guarantee has dropped by about $3.5 billion. And then for the coming fiscal year, the minimum guarantee is estimated to be 109.1 billion. Remember that Prop 98 funds TK all the way up to community college, so TK to 14, and that there's a split. So the typical split is around 90%-ish for K-12 education and about 10% for community colleges. The split actually decreased a little bit for TK to 12 to 89% and up to 11% for community colleges. You'll see here at the 3-year revised estimate for Prop 98 over the prior fiscal year, the current year, and the budget year. We have an asterisk next to the 22-23 school year because of some funding mechanisms that the governor's proposing in relation to how the guarantee or the Prop 98 guarantees is being estimated. And so we'll have some slides on in greater detail in that regard. So the maybe has also provided the opportunity for the Department of Finance to update what the 3-year or year-over-year loss or drop in the guarantee is of those between 22-23 and 24-25. So the Department of Finance is estimating that to be in the tune of about $15 billion or $14.8 billion that you're seeing here. Part of this is a calculation of $8 billion that was provided in the 22-23 school year, so money that's already gone out the door, to recalculate or reclassify that amount of money as non-$98. And that's being referred to as this funding maneuver by the governor. We'll be getting to a little bit more detail in that in future slides here. So Prop 98 will always, well, not always, but will continue to be in test 1 for the current year budget year. I think long-term projections is that it will continue to be in test 1 for quite a while. Test 1 is estimated to be roughly 39.28% of the overall state budget. Generally in the past, but when we talk about test 1, we toss out the number of 40%. That's always 40% of the overall state budget. So it's a more exact calculation, but 40% is kind of generally where you can think of when you can think of how test 1 operates in the calculation of the guarantee. As maybe you know, we also have a reserve account. It's called the Public School System Stabilization Account, or the Prop 98 Rainy Day Fund. The account currently sits at about $8.8 billion. But because of this funding maneuver that the governor is proposing, and where we see the current year and budget year amounts for Prop 98 and the state's ability to meet that amount, essentially the state is unable to meet the guarantee in the current year and in the budget year to the tune of about $8.8 billion. So the governor is proposing using all of the reserve in the current year and in the budget year to cover the inability of the state to pay for the guarantee. Again, this would exhaust the reserve after 24-25. This would also trigger the lifting of the local reserve cap requirements. So as some of my district folks will know, the local reserve cap has been in place for several years now because of the state's ability to fully fund the cap, the max amount, minimum amount of funding for the Prop 98 reserve. Because the governor is proposing zeroing out the reserve, the local cap will be lifted and won't apply in the 24-25 fiscal year. There is a COLA that's proposed. Many of you might recall in January that the governor proposed a COLA of 0.76%. We're seeing that COLA increase to 1.07%. And these are the programs that have historically and traditionally received the COLA, and that will continue to receive the COLA if the COLA is included in the final adopted budget. In terms of pension costs, this is, and I know this is the main focus of this webinar, and we want to make sure that we talked about this up front. You will see the 2 out-year projections from the 2 different state pension funds, CalSTRS, the Teacher Retirement System, and then CalPERS, our Public Employee Retirement System. CalPERS is a little bit more of a wild west because they have a greater diversity and array of different classifications of workers across the state, from law enforcement to rank and file state employees. CalSTRS is much more isolated in terms of its population. They only serve teachers or credentialed employees. And so CalSTRS is not projected to see any increases in the out year beyond 25-26. CalPERS, however, we are seeing a slowed growth, which is good, but growth nonetheless, and this will continue to put pressures on school district budgets and the amount of funding, pardon me, that they have to allocate to meet that local pension obligation cost. So let's get into the funding maneuver and what it is and why we have it and what it means. So how did we get here? Well, it's important to go back in time and to look back to what happened in early 23, late 22. If you all recall, we had these severe winter storms where we had states of emergency not just declared across the state, but across the country. And as a result, we saw the delayed deadline for the filing of income taxes from April 15th of 2023 to October 15th of 2023. And then again, by an additional 30 days to November 15th. This was really unprecedented actions by both the IRS and the Franchise Tax Board, the state board, to the collection of tax revenues. In my 20 plus years of working on the state budget, I've never seen a delay of this fashion. And this has really resulted in unprecedented territory for the state. It's really placing the state in a place where we're just kind of flying fiscally blind. So because revenues were not, income tax revenues were not filed on April 15th, the state had to use projected or estimated tax revenues to develop their budget. So they were using the best guess that they had. And that's really resulted in some changing in some numbers. And one of the reasons because we didn't know until much later in 2023 was that the state's big three tax revenues, so that's income taxes, sales, and corporate taxes, and more predominantly personal income taxes, where capital gains plays a substantial role, fell by 25%. And remember that 50% of the state's revenues come from the state's top 1% income earners. So when the wealthiest of the wealthiest are not doing well, or when we see lesser initial public offerings by, say, tech companies in Silicon Valley, those have significant impacts on the state budget, including the sale of real property, so the sale of residential properties predominantly. That's again a contribution to capital gains, and why we have such a fluctuation in our state revenues. So this loss of revenue that happened at the end of 23 is impacting how the state calculated the Prop 98 guarantee for the prior fiscal year to the tune of about $8.8 billion. Now the state is saying, or the governor is saying, hey, this is money that did go out to schools and districts, but what we're going to do is we're going to treat these dollars differently than we would normally in relation to Prop 98. This is really kind of creating a very unprecedented shortfall and something that we've never experienced before in the history of Prop 98, arguably. It is forcing the state in a position where they have to either the funding provided to Prop 98 in 22-23, which we would maintain, and find the money somewhere else, or lower the Prop 98 guarantee artificially. And that artificially is something that we're very concerned about. So the fall and this maneuver is the perfect kind of think about it is it's kind of like a short-term loan, an interest-free short-term loan that the state is providing to itself. So rather than acknowledge the $8.8 billion as counting towards a guarantee, it's reclassifying it as another type of funding. So essentially the state would now be using its strong cash position. The state has a lot of cash on hand, and would take that strong cash position, kind of classify that cash as to fill that $8.8 billion gap. And then over time, beginning in 25-26, to start repaying that $8.8 billion cash maneuver, beginning in over a 5-year period to the tune of about $1.76 billion annually. So like I said, the way to kind of think about this is like it's a no interest loan to itself. But this funding maneuver, because it reclassifies $8.8 billion, has long-term impacts on how Prop 98 will be calculated. So in an because of the unprecedented manner, it also requires unprecedented action. And CSBA's advocacy on this one is clear. We are opposed to the maneuver. We are urging the legislature to reject the maneuver. We feel that it undermines the principles of the Prop 98 guarantee. We believe it's unconstitutional. And we feel that any effort to bridge that $8.8 billion amount should occur in compliance with existing statutes and the Constitution. So our message right now is that we are urging, again, the legislature to protect, not undermine Prop 98, reject the maneuver, and stick to the Constitution. So now I'm going to get into our budget, the governor's specific budget proposals. So as many of you might be aware, when the governor proposes his annual budget, sometimes the governor likes to include very specific programmatic funds or very specific policy changes. So this is what this next section will address. Special education funding, we are seeing, as noted on a previous slide, that the special ed will receive the COLA, that 1.07% COLA to the tune of about $19.6 million statewide. Interestingly, however, the state is going to be shifting some dollars over to some electric school bus monies, and I'll have a slide on that a little bit further here. But the state is providing additional $255 million for special ed to address increases in funding sources, and then also an additional $134 million to reflect growth in the number of children who are qualifying for other IEPs. Universal school meals, total funding for the school meals program is being estimated at just under $300 million. This includes a breakdown, as you see here, of some ongoing Prop 98, including the COLA, as well as some additional federal dollars to help meet the increased participation in the program. School facilities is where we saw some fairly significant changes in the budget in terms of the proposals in the May revise. So many of you might recall that in prior year budgets, the governor, when we were kind of awash in one-time monies because of in the middle of the pandemic, proposed a substantial amount of allocation of one-time dollars to our state facilities program, and even created a new program called the Preschool Transitional Kindergarten and Full Day Kindergarten Program. Well, here we are now in a situation where the state's in an operational deficit and we're facing loss in revenue. So some of those monies that have gone out are being pulled back. So that's what we see in relation to the school facilities fund. So the governor's proposing an additional reduction of the state facilities program to the tune of $365 million. So that's already been on top of a $500 million reduction that was occurring in the current year. And so over the 2-year fiscal period, we'll see almost a zeroing out of the remaining amount of money in the state facilities program. He's also eliminating the $550 million that was intended to be allocated for the preschool transitional kindergarten and full day kindergarten program. This was money that was delayed year over year over the last 2 years in the hopes that the state would be in a place to allocate this funding, recognizing the needs of many districts to build these types of facilities, but unfortunately that has not been realized. And so the governor proposing pulling back permanently that $550 million. This is kind of part of an effort by the state to really address some belt tightening maneuvers. These are, again, part of the efforts that the state has taken to help reduce the operational deficits. There are discussions ongoing about a school facilities bond. So right now there's 2 measures in the legislature that are under consideration. Of a statewide school bond on the November 24 ballot. One is SB 28. The other is AB 247. SB 28 is a Senate bill that intends to provide a bond of about $15 billion, I should say, $15 billion for K through 12 school facilities, as well as, I should say, K through 14 facilities and UC and CSU, so higher ed. AB 247, or the Assembly's version, is $14 billion, so $1 billion less, for TK to 14. So they exclude higher ed, so they exclude CSU and UC. So that's really where the difference of opinion is between the two houses. We will see what the formal overall negotiations result in. The legislature doesn't have a lot of time left. They have about less than a month to agree to a bond and have it placed on the November ballot. Electric school buses, I mentioned this earlier. The governor's kind of doubling down on funding electric school buses. This includes switching preschool dollars over to the electric school bus program to the tune of about $254 million out of the state preschool program. Pardon me. So ERAF, we're seeing some changes in ERAF. This is the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. This is a win for CSBA's Education Legal Alliance, where we're having the recalculation of how money is shifted to the local level for local government property taxes and how it helps fund public education. This shift ensures that charter schools are part of the calculation of ERAF. So this was a big deal and a big win for CSBA, recognizing that ERAF does help many districts meet their educational needs. State preschool program. This correlates the electric school bus slide where we saw the shifting of $254 million into electric vehicle count. This is reducing money that would otherwise go towards the expansion of inclusionary program practices for special needs kids. Initially, the state has a 5% requirement that 5% of enrollment in preschool programs be for students with special needs. They want to increase that to 10%, and then eventually to, I believe, 12% in the coming fiscal years. But that has been being pulled back, and that funding that was allocated for that purpose is being is proposed to be transferred into the electric vehicle count. This will be a substantial impact on full day and part day preschool programs, and something that CSBA has fairly serious programs concerns with, I should say. So ELOP, we're not seeing any substantial changes policy-wise, but programmatically we are. So again, this maintains a prioritization of $4 billion in ongoing Prop 98 to fund lost learning opportunities through the ELOP program. Though there are some estimates that there's a substantial amount of money that's being unspent in that program year over year. Some are estimate that number to be closer to about $3 billion. So to kind of accelerate or put some additional requirements to ensure the spending of those dollars, the state is proposing requiring districts that have encumbered money in the 21-22 and 22-23 fiscal years to spend that money by the end of this federal fiscal year, so September 30th, 24. Moving forward, it's requiring that ELOP funding be fully expended within 2 years, requires school districts to state that they are going to offer ELOP beginning the 25-26 school year, and then it also allows the state to reallocate unspent ELOP monies. The question is what that means in terms of reallocate. Devil's going to be in the details, but does that mean within the program, or does that mean within the greater Prop 98 spectrum? Attendance recovery and instructional continuity. These are some fairly large policy proposals that were included in the January budget. Faced a little bit of pushback on these proposals. So in response, they are delaying the proposed implementation of the program to July 1st, 2025. Clarifying some pieces in relation to the existing ability to use Saturday and Sunday school, if you will, as efforts to address chronic absenteeism, and then clarify how and when a student participation extends beyond the initial 15 days of participation in a instructional continuity program, or in the, attendance recovery program. This program is really intended to replace what was the short-term independent study program that was created during the pandemic in an effort to address the distance learning requirements and the quarantining that was required in the heart of the pandemic. So the state's taking the opportunity to kind of swap out the short-term independent study program with this program. But these are fairly substantial changes, and so we've expressed concerns that these are so substantial that they will require additional consideration, additional time, especially in regards to how attendance recovery would occur. And so, in response to that, we are at least thankful that the governor and the state is pushing back the implementation deadline to July 1, 2025. Broadband infrastructure grant program. This was something that we saw a lot of investment in during the middle of the pandemic because of the increased use of distance learning and online learning. We saw in the prior budget year the expansion of this program by an additional 4 years. But again, as part of this kind of belt tightening, if you will, you're seeing the state propose deleting the extension of the program, which would effectively result in the elimination of the program beginning July 1st of this year. We are, and again, thankful for efforts to fund the existing programs that were these substantial programs that were created during the pandemic. This includes universal transitional kindergarten, the home to school transportation program, community schools grant program, and some teacher recruitment and development programs. There are some modest changes within some existing grant programs within our teacher recruitment programs, but again, these were so substantial that We want to make sure that if you can reach at current rates, we're pleased to see at Universal Transitional Kindergarten the rebenching of Prop 98, which is critical to recognizing the increased enrollment as a relation to the expansion of the program. And also part of this, I would say the message here is please take into account the challenges presented by additional unfunded mandates. So let's continue to maintain existing programs, not create new ones per se. So that was a lot of information really fast. What I'll do here is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll pop it over to James and to Ryan for the second half of our presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the information you provided. It's very comprehensive and thorough, covers of the May revise and the governor's budgets. Hopefully you can see this on my screen. So thank you again. Today I'll speak on the OPEB Solutions program that PARS has in partnership with CSBA. Maybe just to set the stage, just a brief description, what is OPEB and GASB 75 and how does this affect school districts? With regard to OPEB, it's kind of an acronym for Other Post-Employment Benefits that is provided to retired employees other than pensions. So in short, this is your retiree health care medical benefits that are provided if your district provides that to your employees. Governmental Accounting Standards Board, or GASB 75, is sort of the reporting requirement for showing these liabilities on your financial statements. When PARS began their partnership with CSBA, close to 20 years ago on providing a solution for GASB 45, this was meant to be a comprehensive solution to assist with reporting of the requirements for GASB. At the time, your retiree health care liabilities were a footnote within your financial reporting. Fast forward a number of years where GASB, in trying to illustrate and be a little bit more transparent with the liabilities associated with that, updated their requirements to GASB 75, where now agencies and districts are required to show the net OPEB liability, which means not only the liability associated with your retiree health benefits or OPEB benefits, but also the assets that you have with regard to those specific liabilities. So just a little bit of a change with the requirements for OPEB and reporting. Latest trends with regard to, how are districts approaching these OPEB liabilities and what are they doing to address these unfunded obligations? Obviously, I think with many of you have seen, rising healthcare costs have really put a strain on these liabilities as folks are, living longer, earning these higher costly benefits. We're to a point where if left unaddressed, these can become unsustainable costs. So there's what we're generally seeing with regard to how districts are addressing this is kind of three different options. The first is a pay-as-you-go. And simply put, this is sort of as these costs are coming up each year, districts are simply paying these out. So, I think unfortunately, as I mentioned, with rising healthcare costs and these increasing year over year, this can be a very difficult task to achieve with just pay-as-you-go, seeing year over year increases. Other districts have maybe taken a step further where they are setting aside funds in a general reserve fund. So, they might set aside a specific fund or have a fund earmarked. However, although they're recognizing that there is this liability, there are some shortcomings with regard to just setting aside the funds, meaning that these funds technically can be used for anything else. It's not, even though you have it earmarked for the liability, technically it is not recognized as an asset. The general fund has some earning potentials or limitations where those earnings associated with those funds can be very low. And, essentially, as I mentioned earlier, it can be used for anything else. The last function, or the last option, is a trust pre-funding into a separate trust. And this is what I want to expand on in today's discussion, where a Section 115 trust is specifically set up by a school district to address these unfunded liabilities. And so what is a Section 115 trust? I think this illustration provides a lot of information, but let me kind of expand on it. The 115 trust is used by local governments to fund essential governmental functions, i.e. your retiree medical benefits or OPEB liabilities or pension, and into this trust or an irrevocable trust. You have the benefit, especially if you have an IRS private letter ruling that has been kind of reviewed by the IRS to review these and bless it, that any income derived from assets put in or contributions put into the trust accumulates on a tax-exempt basis. And at the end of the day, these assets are strictly designated for those liabilities and can only be used for those specific expenses associated with those liabilities. Oftentimes irrevocable trust has sort of a negative connotation, but let me maybe clarify that, is that because it isn't a trust specific to those liabilities, it's dedicated for those liabilities and can only be used specifically for that. But the districts or agencies that are funding have access to this at any time, where you can reimburse for your OPEB pay-as-you-go expenses. That was sort of that first option that we were seeing on the previous slide. You can, on the pension side, these can be contributions that are reimbursed directly to your pension, whether that is for STRS or PARS. Lastly, you can pay OPEB expenses directly to the retiree. So that's another method that can be used. And also any plan expenses related to those liabilities, whether it's for an actuarial valuation or audit. So what we try to highlight here, again, as I mentioned, PARS has this partnership with CSBA to provide the trust for OPEB liabilities. In this particular illustration, we're reflecting a combination trust that is unique to PARS, where you have the ability to pre-fund one or the other, and in doing so, you're taking money out of the general fund and putting it into a specific trust or to address those liabilities. And this next slide, I think, really highlights the benefit of utilizing a 115 trust. What I unfortunately see with a lot of school districts is that they are adopting that pay-as-you-go method for addressing these liabilities. This slide here is really a snapshot of a school district sort of looking back where, when doing an actuarial valuation, really an actuarial valuation is a snapshot of your plan or of your liabilities at a specific point in time. So going back, this district in 2011 had an accrued liability for the retiree health benefits of just shy of about 17 million. I think at that point, because there was no trust set up, they couldn't recognize any assets, or they didn't have any assets set aside for that. At that point, their assets to liabilities or their funded ratio was 0% because there wasn't anything set aside, and their annual benefit payments, or their pay-as-you-go, was approximately $652,000. Fast forward, they set up a 115 trust, began pre-funding, setting aside assets specific to that. And in doing so, they were actually able to use a higher rate or a discount rate, 5%, versus what the initial valuation was looking at was about 3%. Sort of the rule of thumb for pre-funding is that for every 1%, there's an increase in the discount rate. The unfunded liability is lowered anywhere from 10 to 12%. So again, fast forward about 10 years, as a result of a higher discount rate, setting aside assets into this trust, pre-funding on a regular basis to put assets into the trust, as a result, you can see that their net OPEB liability significantly decreased, where they were at a funded ratio of about 88% or so. So that's sort of kind of the benefit. You are able to lower those liabilities as a result of the higher discount rate, with the assets or contributions put in, as well as the earnings. That in turn lowers your overall net OPEB liability. Your funded ratio increases, which is what you are reporting on your financial statements. And as a result as well, not only the liability, but also the pay-as-you-go cost, there was a decrease in that. And maybe I can, at this point, also address some misconceptions about the OPEB pre-funding and setting up a trust, where, really this is part of being proactive in addressing your district's financial health, or, looking at liabilities that are associated with that. Sort of piggybacking off of that first slide where we mentioned sort of the different options that districts are pursuing. What if you can you lower your liability by setting aside asset in the general fund? So in short, unfortunately, no, because again, the general fund is just that. It's not dedicated specifically to those liabilities, and therefore GASB does not recognize those assets. So in the previous slide I showed, with the pay-as-you-go, where there were zero assets, even if you have a general fund and you're putting money in the general fund for that liability, those assets would not be recognized and would therefore not offset your net OPEB liability, or would not lower your net OPEB liability. Second misconception: if you set up a pre-funding trust, are you obligated to make regular contributions? So again, this is part of the beauty of the 115 trust, is this local control with regard to your district having the ability to control sort of the frequency of how much you put in, when to put in, the dollar amounts. If you need to make withdrawals, you have that ability, whether it's to pay for expenses, etc. But ideally you want to put in assets to fund or lower your liabilities, similar to the example I used in the previous slide with the district that set up that liability and got to a higher funded status. However, you are not obligated to make regular contributions. So again, that is at the discretion of the district. Obviously, your actuary would like to see regular funding policies or contributions being made, but in times of economic difficulties, etc., those can be sort of a fund that you can tap into, or alleviate your general fund. And lastly, if I set up a pre-funding trust, will that money be stuck if you eliminate OPEB benefits? And again, the answer to this is no, because at the end of the day, these are assets specific to those liabilities. In the event that the district would eliminate OPEB benefits, once all of those obligations have been fulfilled and paid out, if there's any money remaining, that would be returned to the district. So again, you're setting it aside specific to a liability. If that benefit is eventually eliminated, that any remaining assets after obligations have been paid out would be returned to the district. So part of that, the pre-funding is that you're trying to protect this benefit that you are providing to your employees, and by setting aside assets into a trust, you are addressing that. Should the district ever, maybe in the future, eliminate those OPEB benefits, that would be returned to the district. And maybe this is a good segue into the pension cost aspect of liabilities. Chris touched on earlier in his presentation the rising costs of STRS and PARS. With STRS, it has sort of leveled off, but PARS continues to rise. Sometimes these are, again, out of the district's control with regard to, what the assumptions being used by CalPERS, or the discount rate that they're trying to achieve, market volatility, et cetera. This is a situation that we've seen over time, over many years, going back from 2015 to, the 2029-30 year, where those rates continue to rise, especially on the CalPERS side. On the CalSTRS, we've seen these rates nearly double. while on the CalPERS side, those are more than doubling for CalPERS. So, again, increasing liabilities can put, additional financial strains on your district. And what can you do to address those? The 115 trust is something. Again, here is a sample agency's contribution increases just in the last few years. You can see the pension rate increases, through 2028, from about 11.6 million to 14 million. And in this particular case, and we've seen going back even on the previous slide further, these have been increasing and continue to increase. So, just in this slide alone, you can see this is about a 20% increase for that annual pension cost. So again, the 115 trust is an additional option to fund those pension liabilities in addition to your OPEB. So, I think I've covered some reasons for pre-funding, and I'll just kind of briefly summarize. Really you're trying to address these long-term costs, especially rising costs on both your retiree health benefit and or pension. This is a burden that's going to be affecting your district, and planning is important with regard to, trying to manage these in the future. You're creating an asset that would address these liabilities by placing it into this exclusive benefit trust, which again is addressing your ongoing OPEB or pension liabilities. The rainy day fund, this is sort of another benefit created by setting assets aside into a trust where it can create like an emergency source of funds for either of those liabilities when times get tough, where it's alleviating the stress on your general fund. So by having this dedicated sort of pool of money in a trust, you can tap those. I maybe want to highlight one particular district, school district in the Northern California area that set up an OPEB trust early on in the 2006 timeframe, put money in to start building up their assets. Come the economic downturn of 2008, 2009, they experienced difficulties similar to other districts where they were able to sort of tap into these liabilities or this trust for their OPEB liabilities, alleviating the strain on their general fund. And it proved to be very timely that they had this resource to go to. After a few years, after the downturn, they were able to readdress the OPEB liabilities, put in contributions to build that back up, and are now back up to a better funding status than they were. So again, with the why pre-funding liabilities help stabilize these costs that can affect your district, rising costs with regard to not only your OPEB but also your pension liabilities. I mentioned earlier, this is a chance to retain those benefits on the OPEB side. This is a benefit being provided to your employees. You want to be able to provide that or fund that. Achieving the better rate returns. This is what was illustrated on that previous slide with regard to the higher discount rate, where by utilizing a 115 trust, you are not subject to the general fund restrictions, the governmental code for that, whereas in a trust, you are able to diversify those investments. I have a slide coming up that kind of reflects different investments that you can use to try to earn a higher rate of return than you would through your county treasury pools. And at the end of the day, this is again part of strengthening that financial health of your district. A side benefit of that is, credit ratings can look favorably upon districts that are taking this proactive approach to address the liabilities. Here's the slide that I mentioned with regard to the investments where, because of the different governmental code sections that apply to OPEB and pension, that alleviate some of the restrictions associated with the general fund, dependent upon your school district and sort of your investment horizon, risk tolerance, challenges, et cetera, that you're facing. You can select an appropriate investment strategy that would help grow the assets or meet and help lower those liabilities, where you can now take on an allocation of equity and try to earn a higher rate of return, as I mentioned, than you would through your general fund or through your county treasury pools. These are just examples of going from maybe a conservative all fixed income to gradually increasing the allocation of equities to try to earn a higher rate of return. So just something to consider with regard to pre-funding. And then sample pensions funding policies. I think in the past, what we've tried to communicate to districts is, set something up so that you can address those liabilities. On the OPEB side, ideally with those valuation reports, again, those are a snapshot of your program or your plan at a specific point in time, looking at the liabilities and how do you build up those assets to address those, or kind of a budgeting tool to pay those down, where ideally if you can contribute the annual or actuarially determined contribution, think of that as your budgeting tool to pay that down, or whether it's less than that, or even a lump sum and just let the money sit there and grow, or just anything to get started. I think anything is better than nothing. You are trying to be proactive and address these liabilities that are continuing to grow. And I think between this slide and the next slide with regard to the sample funding policies, whether it's for pension or OPEB, this just illustrates the flexibility available to agencies that set up the 115 trust, where you have that local control with regard to how much you put in, when you put in, how aggressive you want to be with your investments. And these are different examples of what other agencies or districts have done, with regard to reserve balances or caps, or, if there's additional monies that they have, how they are addressing it. So again, and it kind of goes back to that misconception point of, do you have to contribute on a regular basis? And this is sort of what other particular school districts may have done, or what they've are doing to come up with a funding policy. Maybe just let me finish on the, the 115 trust with, remember the benefits of pre-funding. You are creating an asset to address these liabilities that can in turn also earn a higher potential rate of greater return than you would through just setting it aside in your general fund. And as a reminder, these assets can always be accessed at any time for those expenses, as long as it is for those specific liabilities. Again, at the end of the day, you're creating this rainy day fund where you are being proactive and dedicating these specific liabilities or these specific assets for these liabilities. At the end of the day, this is providing a fiscal tool in your financial toolbox. And what we like to say is prepare today for tomorrow's OPEB and pension realities. I think another footnote I wanted to add is that GFOA looks at pre-funding liabilities as best practice, so that works in your benefit as well. Maybe I can transition quickly on the supplementary retirement plan, what we call an early retirement incentive. Again, given the May revise and the revenue deficits or lowering of revenues and the financial strain, this can cause districts to consider cost-cutting measures or cost-saving measures, with regard to, will positions have to be eliminated, or will there be layoffs, reorganization, salary schedule, whether there are increases in COLAs, et cetera. These, what we call a SERP or early retirement incentive, offers districts a possibility of a cost savings approach. Generally speaking, we try to do an analysis where we look at your employees, what that fiscal impact would be on an early retirement incentive, and try to design a win-win situation where employees don't have to face layoffs, or the layoff impact can be mitigated by offering this incentive. You can thank them for their many years of service. The district can hopefully earn a savings on their budgets. Essentially, this early retirement incentive is a supplemental benefit paid to encourage employees to retire from service earlier than they normally would. And by offering that, we're looking at trying to increase participation sort of above and beyond what would naturally occur and where the replacement of that retiring or departing employee with a lower salaried employee can result in savings for the school district. And even if that can help mitigate, even eliminating these higher salaried employees can help achieve those savings. If your district is considering or would just like to kick the tires on a program, PARS does offer a complimentary analysis to sort of look at your demographics, run certain scenarios just to see what that potential impact would be. And we're always very transparent. If it doesn't work, we're going to be upfront. And if it does, and you want us to administer the plan and move forward, we'd be happy to do so. With that, I can pause and turn it back to James. Maybe I can stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, Chris, if you want to come back on as well. Chris, I know you addressed a question in the chat. I think we're good there. I don't see many questions. I know it's a lot of information. I guess the one question I would have, Ryan, if you don't mind, while we give a little bit of time if folks want to provide some questions, is what are typical questions that you may hear that folks should consider, right, when they're reviewing this information when it comes to OPEB? And I would double back to you, Chris, just some couple quick highlights, just things to consider. I know it's a lot of information, and just want to make sure we're touching on that general piece of it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, maybe just generally speaking, yeah, it's a lot of information to consider. I think taking into account that retiree health benefits are continuing to rise, and just paying out on a pay-as-you-go basis doesn't really address that situation. Those rising costs can become unsustainable at some point. By setting up the 115 trust, this is a way to be proactive. Oftentimes districts will have the challenge of trying to come up with the money, and that's where we would say at least recommend at least setting it up, get the program started. When there is additional monies, you can put it in. You're not obligated to continue funding, but obviously we'd like to see that so that the funded status increases. But money will find its way into the trust, and you're only doing good for your school district in setting up a 115 trust. You don't want to continually kick the can down the road, so to speak. You want be proactive in that. So
perfect, thank you, Ryan. Chris, if you don't mind as well.
In terms of highlights, on
generally speaking, like if in regards to the May revise, what are like some key things you'd say if you were in the district and although there's no questions, you answered a couple of them. Is there anything in particular that we should be really focusing on if you're a district?
I mean, the 30,000 foot level issue is really the how the state is going to address and respond to the shortfall, or the $8.8 billion payment in inclusion in Prop 98 in the 22-23 school year, right? So from CSBA's perspective, that is money that's gone out the door. That's money that's been allocated to districts and spent. So we believe that is and by statute, that is a part of the calculation of the Prop 98 guarantee, right? That has a direct impact on what a lot of the things that Ryan is talking about in relation to how districts are intending to address your not just your current year, but your out year pension and retirement obligations and other things. And so ensuring that that Prop 98 is fully funded and that the guarantee is met is critically important, because those numbers have a direct correlation to the local district's ability to pay for their local pension costs. And so the piece about the maneuver is that we believe it's unconstitutional. We think that the legislature should really stick to the Constitution and existing statute. I think it's also important, I didn't say this before, but it's also important to note that we've been here before, right? The state has gone through some fairly significant recessions since the adoption of Proposition 98. We've actually seen the suspension of Prop 98 twice, once in 2004, 2005, as a result of the dot-com recession, and then again in 2010-11 in response to the Great Recession. In both circumstances, it does create mid-year, cuts to education, yes. But that suspension, whatever the dollar amount is in the suspension, is repaid into Prop 98. That's why the guarantee is the guarantee, right? We call it a guarantee because it's a guaranteed minimum level of funding. If the legislature memorializes the governor's funding maneuver, then it creates a trap door under which the guarantee, the floor, right, the minimum level of funding that we have for Prop 98 will occur. And so then it actually sets a precedent of going forward of the legislature of the state, if they're unable to meet the guarantee because revenues, let's say revenues aren't great or whatever, then it actually means that they could undermine the guarantee whenever they saw fit. So that is one of the biggest issues and takeaways I'd like to leave with those who are attending this webinar, because those pieces are incredibly important as it relates to predictive budgeting and out-year funding for public education.
Awesome, thank you. And there is a couple questions that came in. The first part is, would I like to know when the recording link will be sent out? That will be sent out over the next couple of days. It is on our CSBA YouTube channel. So I will make sure at the end that will be coming from our communications department. So you'll have a copy of the PowerPoint as well. And I believe there's another question. You may have already answered it, Ryan, I'm not sure, but do teachers and staff and admin all receive health benefits in retirement?
Yeah, that really depends upon the school district and what benefits are offered. We've sort of seen the range of no retiree medical benefits to medical benefits provided up until age 65, and even for more generous benefits provided, lifetime retiree health medical benefits. So dependent upon the school district and what is being offered, you have to defer to that.
Okay. And then we have another question. How do the unfunded liabilities affect basic aid districts versus LCFF?
So this is a good question. This is a question that comes up fairly regularly. So the unfunded liabilities do impact not just basic aid districts, but all districts, right? Because of the lack of funding for these types of mandates. Unfortunately, the answer is not one that's great. It depends on what the unfunded program is and whether or not it's adequately funded or not funded at all. And this is one of the reasons why we have an ongoing message about please continue to maintain funding for the existing programs. Please don't create new unfunded mandates that are difficult to implement. Districts are already under stress and under-resourced and understaffed to meet the great level of expectation. And, in fairness, we certainly want to meet the expectations the state has and the public has of our public school system, but at the same time, we have to be realistic and pragmatic and regarding the logistical challenges that we face. So I'll say, in regards to our basic aids or our community funding districts, yes, depending on what the mandate is and whether or not it's funded, does impact not just your district but all districts. And unfortunately, I will say one of the more common questions we get around universal transversal kindergarten is, is there going to be additional dollars in UTK for our community funded districts? Right now, that's not the case. We're not seeing additional dollars allocated specifically for that particular program for our basic aid districts, but it is something that we continue to advocate for.
Awesome. Chris, Ryan, we really appreciate it. We're up against time here. We want to make sure everybody's respectful, and it's lunchtime, I'd imagine, for most folks. So we'll close out. So thank you for everyone for joining us today, and thank you to our presenters as well. CSBA is dedicated to providing up-to-date resources to school board members. To view our recent webinars, be sure to check out our YouTube page at youtube.com/CSBA video. If you're interested in attending future CSBA webinars, please go to our website at www.csba.org/webinars to register for upcoming events. Many thanks to our presenters again. With that, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care.